Welcome to 18-Minute Leaders, JI's new series on insights into parenting, education, and success with leaders of today and tomorrow. I'm Karina Rock, and I'm so happy to be hosting Evonne Marzouk, environmentalist and author of The Prophetess. Hi, Evonne. Welcome.
Hey, it's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Our pleasure. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? You have so much to offer.
Yeah, thank you so much. So it's great to be here. In 2004, I founded and for 10 years served as executive director of Canfei Nesharim, an organization teaching what the Torah says about protecting the environment, which was recently merged with a different organization called GrowTorah. And professionally, I work for the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And I'm also the author of a Jewish inspirational novel called The Prophetess, which was published in October 2019 by Bancroft Press. There it is. Exploring modern adolescent anxieties and ancient mystical teachings, The Prophetess is a story about faith and sacrifice, promises kept through generations, and how through the support of others, we can grow bigger than we ever believed we could be.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm so inspired by the intention and the openness that you pour into everything that you do. And we first met years back when you were involved with Canfei Nesharim deeply, and you were working on creating awareness between the connection about Judaism and the environment. Can you tell us a little bit about that connection and how you personally relate to it?
Yeah, well, so I mean, for me, I think it begins with our concern for our health and the health of our children and grandchildren, and really the moral obligation to use the resources we've been given without overusing them or even abusing them. So for me, it kind of started, like, one way to think about it is to start in the story of Cain and Abel, when God questions Cain saying, where's your brother? And Cain responds like, am I my brother's keeper? And today, like in a time when the car I choose to drive can have dramatic consequences for people on a small island thousands of miles away, or the type of paper I buy could affect an endangered plant with like potential medicinal use in a Brazilian rainforest. I think we have to examine our responsibility to our brothers and our neighbors more deeply. We can ask, like, to what extent does Jewish tradition call us to be keepers of our neighbors or other species or the planet as a whole? And Jewish thinking is actually really smart about that because it calls for the need to balance what we do. It doesn't say you can't do anything. But, like, for example, in the Talmud, we read that certain industries were restricted in their proximity to residential areas to protect the neighbors from this early form of pollution. There's all this sort of balancing, like, you can work on these days, but not on this day. You can eat these things, but not everything, and not needlessly destroy anything. And I think that that's the balance we've been lacking in our world. And it shows in the way we've been overusing our resources and creating, unfortunately, a lot of damage.
I'm so inspired just to hear you talk about it, just because it's so part of who you are. You can articulate it so well, that connection, and like why it's so important and deep. And I want to just say that we're sharing in the chat a link to the Canfei Nesharim website that has, environmental connections to the Parsha, and also environmental 18. Is it 18?
Yeah,
18 principles of, how would you say it?
Yeah, so Rabbi Yonatan Nerel and I with many others, work together to create this comprehensive set of materials on what Jewish tradition says about the environment, which was later collected into a book called Uplifting People and Planet. And the materials that are being shared here are this sort of comprehensive set, 18 topics: the mitzvah to avoid waste, how we care for other creatures, our relationship with the land, water, wealth, food, prayer. And they have source sheets for all the materials. And it's all available on Canfei Nesharim's website. I think it's going to make it over to GrowTorah's website pretty soon. But the site that Karina's sharing now is a great place to get all kinds of resources about these topics.
Yeah, it's such a great tool. And I wanted to just go further and talking about the idea of Shomer Adama, and part of taking care of nature is understanding our role as a Shomer Adama, or a keeper of the earth and everything that lives in it and within it. And that deep understanding of who one is and the responsibility that comes with it is a theme that I see in both your environmental and literary pursuits. So can you share about that connection that you see within your work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, part of being a Jew might be widening one's centers of care and responsibility to include not just oneself, but also one's community and hopefully the larger human community and the world itself. And one source that really speaks to me about this, Rav Kook has this beautiful fourfold song, which I first heard on a youth trip when I was to Israel. And he describes 4 different types of people by the songs they sing. The first is a person who sings the song of the self, and then a person who sings the song of the nation, a person who sings the song of humanity, yearning for humanity's general enlightenment, and then a person who sings with all existence and all creatures and all worlds. And I think this is a call, or at least a recognition that it's true for some, that we should think wider and expand more to yearn for a healed world. And yet, paradoxically, Rav Kook also teaches that when we forget the individual soul, when we stop paying attention to the inner life of the person, everything becomes confusing and unclear. So the beginning of tshuva and spiritual growth is the return to oneself, to the source of one's soul. And so I feel there's a really important lesson here for parents and teachers and really for all of us. We all have to feel ourselves part of the world, like global citizens, caring deeply about the challenges and pains the world is suffering, including the huge environmental challenges we face. And I think we need to work to make them better as much as we can. And we also have to take care of ourselves in physical, emotional, and spiritual ways. The beginning of spiritual growth is the return to ourselves, fully living into our potential and expressing our truth as we know it best, while leaving space for others to have their truths as well. And my book is really about that, about like growing into our gifts, fulfilling our dreams, being our best selves. It's an inspiring journey that can help you and your teen children feel connected to themselves and proud to be Jewish. So maybe the way to say it is that like my book and my environmental work come from like 2 different directions, but they're all part of this spectrum of being our best selves and using that to make the world a better place.
Right. And I feel like you flowed right into my next question, which is, the theme of your book is grow into all your gifts. And you I think feel like you answered that a little bit, but I wanted to know if you wanted to go a little bit deeper and tell us more about what that is and how it connects to the book.
Yeah. So in my novel, The Prophetess is about a 17-year-old American teenage girl, Rachel. And at the beginning of the book, her grandfather dies, which begins for her like a quest to discover who she is as a Jew and what is her relationship with God. And early in the book, Rachel finds an old childhood prayer book that her grandfather had given her. And in the inscription, he had written, "For Rachel, may she grow into all her gifts." And I think this becomes really the theme of the story. And later, Rachel turns this wish into her own prayer, like, "Help me grow into my gifts." And in the story, it turns out that Rachel has many gifts she didn't even realize and wasn't expecting, like to her surprise, the gift of prophecy. And there are people who can help her grow into those gifts. By the end of the book, she is even able to use those gifts to make a significant difference for the people who she cares most about. But some of these gifts also often cause her like significant challenges. And isn't that the way it is for all of us, really? Like we come into the world with gifts, but it might take some effort and struggle to grow into them. And for everyone, my like intention, and for everyone reading the book, for everyone listening now, is that whatever you're doing in life and whatever stage you're in, however much you've already done, we all still have gifts to grow into. And so the opportunity here is really for us all to kind of think, what's the next step for me? What's my potential? How can I grow into my gifts? And I hope that we can all take a moment to really think about that. And since we're talking about gifts, I wanted to mention that my novel, The Prophetess, is now the centerpiece of a new bat mitzvah present, a Grow Into Your Gifts bat mitzvah present, to empower the coming generation of young Jewish women to be inspired to grow into their potential. The package includes a personalized signed copy of the book, a journal with a matching pen, stickers with inspirational messages, candles, and Jewish star jewelry. And we're currently doing a Kickstarter on this project for pre-orders. So for anybody who thinks this would be a fun bat mitzvah present for someone that they know, this is available. And there are all kinds of other kind of goodies that you can get in supporting the campaign. So I think this is a great opportunity to really inspire young Jewish women. And the book is also appropriate for adults as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I find it amazing that you took your creation, this novel, and that you kind of created so many avenues of learning and so many avenues for people to use it as a tool to grow into their gifts, right? And this is just one other one for the bat mitzvah age group. And we had a conversation, and you mentioned to me that we've been kind of, the way that we've looked at the hero's journey is through a masculine hero's journey. And I thought this was fascinating because that's the type of caricature that's always been perpetuated, right? This male hero and the attributes that go along with that. So I want to make that clear that it's really the attributes of a male hero that we kind of decided, okay, this is what a hero looks like, and this is what a hero's journey look like. And then we can now actually, what you mentioned to me that I thought was so really inspiring and incredible is that there is a female hero's journey, right? Mm-hmm. And can you tell us more about what that is and what it looks like?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So in the process of writing my book, I came to understand, and I guess the one way of thinking about it is not like male and female, because that's kind of so gendered, but to think of sort of masculine and feminine, because both sort of men and women can sort of partake of both masculine and feminine stories and journeys, of course. But we do have this sort of traditional hero story, which is usually a man's story. And in that story, like everyone knows this story, like the hero goes on an adventure, he gathers allies or tools, he sets out toward a goal, he wins a victory and a decisive climax, and then he comes home changed by the experience. And the point of the story is to discover and use masculine gifts like strengths, bravery, and maybe tools like technology or magic to save the day and come back transformed. But there's also, and there's nothing wrong with that story, it's a great story. But there's also this feminine journey with a different structure. And one really good example that almost everyone knows is the movie The Wizard of Oz. But the Frozen stories are also built on this structure, which is one reason why I think they have such interesting appeal to many girls. And the story is also the underlying structure under nonfiction memoirs like Glennon Doyle's Untamed. So in this story, a woman must go deep inside herself. Her journey starts with questioning authority and her place in the world. She gathers friends and people help her along the way, and she gains the courage to stand up for herself. And she's finally willing to go it alone and faces her own symbolic death. And then at the end, she comes back to the beginning to see how far she's come. So while the masculine journey is linear, the feminine journey is actually circular, which brings the character back to the beginning with deeper wisdom. If you think about the movie with The Wizard of Oz, it makes a lot of sense. In the feminine journey, she proves herself to herself. And while the masculine hero awakens at the end, letting go of his ego self to be awakened, the feminine hero comes into herself to be awakened. So both kinds of journeys are important. And sometimes a male character, like I said, can take a more feminine journey, and a female can certainly follow a masculine journey path. But when only the masculine journey and gifts are seen and valued, something important is missing. And not just for women. I think knowing and reading books with the feminine version of this hero stories can really help, especially women, relate to their own stories today.
Right. And also, we're all whole people, and we can relate to both journeys.
Right, for sure. And I think that a lot of men find that to be, a compelling thing that maybe they didn't know they could relate to.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to share, I know that you've used JI Tap with your children, but I wanted to share that we have an incredible series called Wonder Women of Israel, that we're sharing with you in the chat right now, that kind of tells the real life journeys of many women in Israel who are real superheroes and who've done amazing things for Israel and the Jewish people. So check that out in the chat. And my last question for you is, you've shared with me a guide. So you have this Bat Mitzvah project, but you also have tons of other material that you can use to kind of enhance the experience of reading the book. And the first question in the material that I read is, if someone told you that you were called for an important leadership role in the Jewish community, how would that make you feel? Would you lean into or resist the suggestion? And this was a question that you had the reader ask themselves before they even read the book, read the Prophetess. So it's such a powerful question. Why did you choose to ask this before someone read the Prophetess?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think, I mean, like you said, it's the starting place for a teacher's guide that I've developed to teach the book, as well as the starting place for a kind of self-led guide for young adult book clubs. And, you know, in any endeavor or experience of learning, I do always think it's best to start where you are and what matters most to you. So I think, you know, it's an interesting question to start with because our relationship with the Jewish community and with our own selves as a leader can define so much of who we are and what it might take to grow into our gifts, to be, you know, to be fully, to live into our potential completely. And leadership in the Jewish community is, of course, like a tricky thing. The Jewish people don't always honor our or support our leaders, and being a Jewish leader can sometimes be both exhausting as well as richly rewarding. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the very people who would resist leadership are actually the best leaders, like Moshe. You know, he didn't always love the idea of leading the Jewish people out of Egypt. He didn't always get the support of the people, but he was the best one for the job. So I asked the question at the beginning of the journey of reading my book, because in the beginning of the story, the main character, Rachel, would probably never have imagined herself as a person with leadership potential, especially in the Jewish community. At the beginning of the book, she feels estranged from the Jewish community and, you know, from herself as a leader. And after she's called to be a prophetess, she logically wants to turn around and tell her teachers to forget the whole thing. But she doesn't. And I think maybe the key to leadership is the willingness to hear the call and like fight through our own doubt and even the doubt of those around us to do what we're meant to do. So I think it's useful to ask this question at the beginning of the story. And I hope that by the end of the story, readers will have a better, sort of more evolved picture of themselves and what might be possible for them if they, you know, choose to kind of fulfill whatever their next dream is.
Thank you so much. This time together has been so insightful. And we always end these sessions with our tweet takeaway. If you had to tweet one takeaway message summarizing your core values or ideas, what would it be?
Yeah, so wherever you are in life, you still have gifts to grow into. What's the next journey for you? I invite you to think about that today.
Thank you so much, Evonne. And I just want to let everybody know that our next 18-Minute Leaders is coming up on the 27th of July. So stay tuned.